Hey folks, it's Bear Gardener, and I am back with another cards video. So, first of all, I am, as ever, a cards content creator, proponent for new players, provider of information on various types of gameplay theory and design. I'm also a Twitch streamer. You can find me pretty much everywhere at bear_gardener. Like, follow, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you really like the stuff that I'm doing, please also consider the Ko-Fi link, which is down below, or Ko-fi, however you prefer to pronounce it, is down below. If you're able to click that support link and donate anything, whether it's monthly, per episode, it really doesn't matter. Literally anything just goes towards making me more able to make more content like this. The reality is that I'm going to keep doing as much as I can anyway, but the donations would allow me to make more content more consistently, which is something I'd love to do. That's life, that's the balance of the world. Right. Anyway, so we need to talk about Shibata. So this is a video that was kind of inevitable with all of the talk that's going on at the minute, but I wanted to take some time to do this one properly because this video is going to be quite noodly, even by my standard. I'm going to try and do a quick précis at the beginning of where Shibata is, my opinions on it, but then after the quick TLDW, I guess, of this video will be actual in-depth discussion as to the reasons why and why my opinions are what they are. So, from the top, if you don't know what Shibata is, it'll magically be appearing on screen. This regiment has created quite an impact since its arrival in the latest patch. It is a contentious one because lots and lots of people really don't like it. They feel like it is very overpowered, and they're not wrong. TLDR, if you are of the opinion that the Shibata Regiment is an overpowered card, you are not wrong. It is. To be clear from the beginning, from a pure balance perspective, a 1-cost 1/3 infantry that is a standard card and does 2 damage to the enemy HQ every time the enemy gives an order is ridiculous. But Shibata's fine right now for what it's doing. And this is probably a very unpopular opinion, and I kind of have to not shy away from that. I'm here to give my actual opinions, analytically based, and talk about the deal here. So the key is in understanding why Shibata exists. Shibata exists because of us, as a community. It does, and I'll explain why. We have, for quite a while now, had an awful lot of groundswell in the community, very understandably, that has had a lot of problems with certain very order-heavy decks that have been using quite potent order combinations that are very effective. In particular, I'm talking about retribution and some of the mill mechanics that have been seeing an increase recently. And Shibata, whether we like it or not, is, at least as far as I am aware, and to be clear, I have light contact with 1939. I have some discussions in the background about various things, but I am not directly connected to their dev team. I don't get to ask questions to which I have absolutely clear answers, and therefore everything that I'm about to talk about is conjecture based on my experience in designing for other forms of tabletop games and tabletop RPGs. Plus 30 plus years of competitive card experience. Shibata is bordering on a silver bullet. Later in the video, if you actually want to get into the whole reasons of that, but the short version of this is a silver bullet is something introduced into a meta to remove a specific problem. I say bordering on because Shibata silver bullets rather are usually aimed at super specific targets, often individual cards or card combinations. Shibata is much broader because of the weight of the cards that it affects. However, my point, and I said I'd keep this short for those of you who don't want to watch the whole video, although I'd love it if you did because I think it's interesting, but that's your choice. Right now, things to understand about Shibata. It's here for a reason. Whether or not you agree with the methodology behind that, it is doing its job. We are seeing less retribution and mill spam since the nerfs and the arrival of Shibata. It is doing what it was intended to do. It is also, incidentally, impacting other decks which didn't need to get hit, but that's a different conversation. Critically, I personally do not expect Shibata to stay in the game in its current form for very long. It is highly unlikely that it will be around for a great deal of time because it is not designed to be. It is my opinion, and I'm moderately certain on this, that the developers have deliberately thrown a single, very effective, overpowered card that answers a question into the game to do a thing that the community were asking for, which is to try and put a crimp in particular archetypes. Until such time as they can find a better fix. Right, that's it. That's the TLDW. The rest of this is going to be me talking about the depth and detail of it. But that's the top end of it, because people ask me my opinion on this all the time. Do I think Shibata is overpowered? Yes, absolutely. It is far too strong for its value, but I think that's incredibly intentional, and I think right now it's doing the job that it's intended to do. Right. Let's get to my actual longer form opinions on this, which are going to be a bit noodly. So, first of all, I want to talk about for me, the single largest issue that Shibata was brought in to deal with, in my opinion, which is retribution. Now, I have talked about retribution before, so there's going to be a certain amount of retreading old ground here, but I'm going to try and keep it reasonably controlled. Retribution is a mechanic which I would imagine, if you're watching this video, there is a very good chance you're already familiar with, but if you're not, there are a number of effects in the game, particularly either ways to repair a unit or when a unit dies, to put a card called Outrage in your hand. When you play that card lets you see 3 of and pick one of a pool of 12, I want to say orders, but they're not, 12 cards that you can then add one of to your hand. Right. This has been contentious from the beginning. It's been contentious for a number of reasons, and we're still trying to work our way through this, and Shibata currently is trying to answer the fact that this became way more popular than the developers expected, and it just did. I'm not going to get into the history of who talked about what, when, and why, and whether anybody had other opinions on this, but it is clear that this was way more popular than the developers expected it to be. What I am going to do is break down why it needs fixing and what I think Shibata is sort of trying to do, along with my opinions on why it worries me as a design ethos, but kind of also why I get it. So, Retribution already ate several nerfs. Yank got changed twice, actually. It got both changed in text value to stop it triggering more than once. Outrage has recently been changed to go from 1 cost to 2 cost. All of this is in an attempt to slow down Retribution, and it honestly, it kind of missed the mark for me, and I've said this before, because the issue with Retribution has never been the cost of Outrage. It's never been the fact that the mechanic works in the game. I'm actually fine with the way that works. I actually think it's interesting. The issue is the 12 cards that you get afterwards. Those 12 cards are, and I'm just going to go really hipshot on this, a 0-cost order that deals 2 damage to a target unit. That's a 0-cost order that deals 2 damage to a target unit. Now, before I get a million comments down below about the fact that it's not 0 cost because I've had to play Outrage and that means I've had to lose a unit and then spend 2 credits and then there's the other thing and maybe I've had to yank into it, if you are using Retribution effectively, you built your deck to be able to afford it and you're probably ramping. We'll get to why that's relevant to this fix and to Shibata in a minute too, because that's, shockingly enough, also a part of what Shibata's here to address, which is the proliferation of heavy ramp decks and credit acceleration via orders. But that 0-cost order is ridiculous. It's far too powerful. We move on. Right, the next one is a 1 cost order. Target unit gets +1/+1 and sets its operation cost to 0. Sorry, what? Also, really quite good. Much more situational, but still very strong for its cost. Then we have a countermeasure. 1 cost countermeasure that says when a friendly unit is destroyed, destroy a random enemy unit. This is probably one of the least used ones, but aside from anything else, why is there a countermeasure in a pool of what should be orders? But anyway, moving on. We also have several 2 cost orders, one of which deals 5 damage to a target unit, which is ridiculously good value. Another of which gives a friendly unit +2/+2 and blitz for 2 cost, which is also really good value, possibly slightly less insane, but still really good. Another one deals, for 2 cost, deals 2 damage to a unit and lets you draw a card. Another one, and this one is more exploitable than you might think, is a 2 cost order that gives target friendly unit gets destruction, add a copy to the owner's hand, which means you can recycle the units that got you here in the first place, thus developing more outrages. Moving on, retribution at 3 cost. We have 2 of these, the first of which distributes the attack of a friendly unit as damage between all enemies, which if you've got really big heavy units on the board, which you probably have because you're ramping and playing retribution, is really good value. And the next one is probably one of the biggest offenders in this, which is a 3 cost order that deals 4 damage to a target in the enemy support line. Yes, you can target your opponent's HQ, and in addition you get +2 HQ defense. This is silly. Then we move on to a 5 cost order that says deal 2 damage to all enemy units, which is just good value. It's a little pricey, but frankly you can make use of it because you can afford it. And then we have retribution. Develop 2 retributions. Parking this, coming back in a second. We also have a 12 cost retribution order that says deal 3 damage, draw 3 cards, gain 3 extra credit slots, and your units get +3/+3, and this is actually probably the one that I'm most okay with because of how expensive it is, and the fact that it kind of has the theme and the feel of what I think retribution should be, which is a kind of interesting way to get to some kind of pseudo-potent one-shot win conditions. But anyway, we'll get back to that because the pseudo-potent one-shot dies because of the card that I said we'd come back to, which we're now going to come back to, which is Retribution. Develop 2 Retributions. It's seen a cost increase. No one cares, they're playing ramp anyway. This card shouldn't exist. You've already got a pool that's creating itself, and there are other ways to get more of them, including getting the unit back, another copy of the unit when it dies that gives you one of these, and obviously Yank, which we'll get to in a minute. But anyway, Retribution, develop 2 Retributions just shouldn't exist. Pick it up, put it in a furnace, burn it to ash, bury it in a lead-lined casket, never pour concrete over it, never think about it again. Just a bad idea. Put something else in there. Or just have a smaller pool, but 12 seems to be a thing. Fine. In the same way, the countermeasure shouldn't be in there because you shouldn't have to be thinking about countermeasures. You should know that they're developing orders, so they're proactively going to use things against them, and not a single one of those orders should be as cheap as these are. Which is where Shibata comes in, frankly, and what Shabata is dealing with right now. These orders are too cheap. The whole pool is too good value. Nothing wrong with having a diverse pool of orders that are available that give you flexibility and effect to it, but one, there is no sunk cost in this because you're building your deck to be able to afford it, so the cost of the outrage is irrelevant. Let me say that again so that I'm clear about my fundamental perspective here. The cost of the outrage is irrelevant. You've already factored that into your deck, and if you haven't, you built a bad retribution deck. Move on. What is relevant is how much the orders actually cost to enact, and these are universally too cheap. Apart from the ones that are just ridiculous and shouldn't exist, which includes develop 2 retributions, anything that gets you HQ defense, and the countermeasure. Everything else is also... I'm not a big fan of get a destroyed unit back, but I'm kind of okay with it, as long as it's more expensive. But those 3 just don't belong in this pool. At all. Ever, under any circumstances. Nothing in this pool should be able to gain you HQ defense. You want that, go invest in it somewhere else. Include some milk trucks or have a Brit ally. You want to develop extra retributions? Play Yank. That's what it's for. Get rid of the ridiculous get 2 retributions and the countermeasure thing I've covered. Just make the pool orders and orders only. Right. This is how I would fix it, and this is relevant to the perspective that I'm trying to put across on Shibata. Shibata basically creates a very cheap answer to all of these problems for one of the decks, or at least the ally and or main nation of several decks which suffer most against this archetype. Which is still, honestly, not great design, because it is the definition of mopping up the leak on the floor, not actually turning off the thing that's leaking. However, there is a storied history in CCGs, physically and digitally, of doing precisely this because of the effect of lead time. But we'll get to that in a minute. The next half of this conversation is mill, which has also eaten a nerf. Mill, for those who don't know what it is the use of deck archetypes that cause you, the opponent, to draw cards, which you may sound like a positive thing, but if done right, basically causes you to overdraw and discard cards, thus taking the game to the end, and then you die to fatigue. The fact that someone brought a full set of mill decks to the OC Season 1 is not a minor part of the reason why this has suddenly become an issue. But mill has always been strong in every card game it has ever been a major archetype or even a minor archetype in, because it is ridiculously effective if you know what you're doing. It's hard to pilot well, but it's powerful. Shibata answers this too, because it makes you pay a price for milling, which brings your HQ down, which means that risking going to fatigue is tougher. But it's still... Again, it's mill's already eating nerfs, and if you needed the nerfs and Shibata, have you hit mill hard enough? Which we'll get to in a bit. So these are the two major things that, in my opinion, are on that. There are lots of other minor things out there. Lots of very strong orders out there. There are lots of decks that were running heavy orders. You could look at Air Exile with its use of Hammer Home, and this at least penalises that a bit, although it's a relatively minor example. There are quite a few decks that were going heavy aggro decks that were just firing out cheap buff orders. Those are also a possibility to see affected by this. And of course there's the hard control decks that are using lots and lots of orders, which again are affected by this in a different way. All of these things are in effect being impacted by Shibata's effect. That 2 damage to HQ every time you give an order is not small. And that's, in effect, right now, at least as far as I can tell from my perspective, it's having the impact it's intended to have, in that I'm running into those decks less often, but critically not at all. And those people playing them are getting a lot better at playing those decks and building them much more carefully, and including answers to Shibata. But it also has a downside, which is that it is very area of effect. It's crippling to a number of other deck archetypes which were frankly fine. Any Poland Legions ally deck doesn't like this because they like to use intel orders, which they're now getting punished for, and they weren't that potent, they weren't dominating anything. And this is the thing. It's the broadness of effect. Now, I said I'd talk about the storied history of silver bullets in card games. This has always been a thing, where if you have a problem as a designer, and it can be very hard to fully fix it. And sometimes you need a temporary control mechanism, some kind of throttle on the problem, until you can actually change it. Usually, traditionally, this would be the release of a silver bullet card that would sit in a set until the next set, which was lead time down because you're developing ahead of yourself. So odds are your next set/release, in the case of cards, is already pretty much fixed. So you throw Shibata in because it doesn't address the problem that you've just raised it, and it lets you kick the can down the road until the patch afterwards, which is understandable. It's been the same in any cyclical game, particularly Magic the Gathering's had this before, where there has been a need to either ban something, change something, throw a silver bullet into something until you can phase it out. Which is what I sincerely hope is going to happen. Note, I sincerely hope. I don't know, I can't know. I'm not in that storied position to be able to say I know for certain that's what's going to happen. Whereas what I, as a designer, would hope is going to happen is that what will change is the actual core problem. We will see changes to these orders, to these pools, to these mechanisms that have been cried out for, either through rotation or alteration, to allow Shibata to then be toned down. Maybe to less defense, maybe to only 1 damage to HQ, maybe to be more expensive. Who knows? There are a million ways you can tune this card down, but for now, it is there. Right, so that should give you some idea of where I'm coming from with the perspective of what Shibata's designed to address and why it's doing what it's doing. Now, from a design perspective, I don't like silver bullets. I never have, because it's the old analogy that has been used with silver bullets forever. A silver bullet is still a bullet, and hydrostatic shock is still hydrostatic shock. Which is to say that just because you have a silver bullet to shoot a werewolf doesn't mean that if you shoot a human being, they'll be fine. Same is true here, which is what I mean when I talk about other decks being impacted from this. It's very broad. It's going to be hard to live with, and honestly, I think we're going to have to for a while. And I'm not sure it's the end of the world. There are many, many things out there. You can answer Shibata with trades, an effect, and removal, and eat the 2 damage for playing the sudden strike or whatever onto it. But I do get that is frustrating. And I do get that it's clunky, and I do get that it's going to annoy people, and it is my sincere hope, and mostly genuine belief, that the designers at 1939 are smart enough to realise that this is not a long-term solution. It is a very kludgy, brutal effect that is currently doing the job. Now, I did mention earlier, and I'll elaborate a little bit because you've been with me this long, that picking Japan as the nation to get this regiment is also relatively intentional, in my opinion. Again, the decks that were struggling most into these archetypes, particularly Retribution, were decks that were heavy aggro based and had lots of low defense units, often including Japan, either as a main nation or an ally. So it makes sense that you would include the answer with that nation. Of course, the downside with this, and I've seen people comment about this, if you're going to do something like Shabata, why doesn't every nation get a version of it? Frankly, because it would be overkill. Because it's meant to be temporary. This is not, and I really want to emphasise this, there is no reason that I can possibly think of to believe that this is a long-term solution. I will be very sad if it actually is. I think it's a way of, as I say, kicking the can down the road until we can actually get the developers can sit down and get to addressing it. But this is it. I mean, this is where I sit on Shibata, and people have asked me often enough about my opinion, so I'm giving it to you. The unwashed version. I'm not hiding the fact that there are things I don't like about this. I'm a designer by nature, which means I'm a perfectionist by nature, and I don't like band-aid fixtures like this. I don't. They feel clunky and awkward and horrible, and honestly, you just, as a designer, and believe me, that I know this feeling, you want to get to the next change or update or reprint, whatever the next version is, to be able to actually get the real fix out there, because every time you see this, it makes you feel bad inside. Because you realise that there's an issue when it's not been properly addressed. Again, it's all out there, just stuff to do, but this is my view on Shibata, the issues that it's brought, and I'm not going to let this video go any longer because I'm going to keep this one under half an hour. So, as always, thank you for tuning in, thank you for sticking with me through this, thank you for being supportive over the past many, many months that I've been in the game, and closing in on a year that I've been streaming the game. Please check out the rest of my content, check out various links down below. Join my Discord, there'll be a link in the thing. If the link's expired, which will happen because of the way it works, reach out on the Cards main Discord or in the comments below and I will get you an up-to-date Discord link. Unfortunately, I can't have an evergreen link because that requires me paying out a fee every year and I can't afford to. That might change if I get a lot of support via, and I'm plugging it again, the link down below to donate if you feel like this has been of value to you. As always, thanks for being here, stay well, be good human beings, and I'll catch you in the next video.